this. All right, our next speaker is somebody I never actually heard of until this year, and it's amazing because he has been in our universe for such a long time, and somehow or other there wasn't quite the connection, and it's very interesting. His name is Kent Bicknell, and he's founded Sant Bani School and was there for 44 years. And this is a school, would you say it's Buddhist?
No, but you can say that and people will kind of get a flavor.
Get
they'll get it when I give my talk.
It's really unusual in that respect. And I just want to add another thing too, is when I was first communicating with him, I found that another one of the hats that he wears is he's a collector of all kinds of literary things from a very important period of time in alternative education. He can tell you about that. And he was the one who actually gave me these letters from Neil, which you may have seen in the e-newsletter. So, Kent Bicknell.
Thank you. Oh, I think I pressed something and I shouldn't have.
There you go.
I will see how this goes. Handle everything here.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I got your thing.
Just would love to get this over where I can see it. So can that come up and over?
Yeah.
Whoa. All sorts of excitement. Is it out of the way? All right, well, thank you. Wow, there's a lot of you here, which is really, really exciting.
Hold it closer to you.
I will hold it closer to me. And I want to say, you know, in terms of trying to put something together, I was thinking of, well, it's kind of like a Rubik's Cube, but it's not, because that has the built-in sense that there's a final way to do it. And I said, it's more like a bunch of Legos. And I had all these Legos, and I kept throwing them out because it's too short. I mean, so at any rate, you could have put this program together very differently than how I did, but here you go. I'll try and do kind of a whirlwind tour through, a little bit through Sant Bani School, but a lot through Alcott, Henry Thoreau, some Emerson, and some other things along the way. I'm starting with a book that was given to Edward Bangs from his friend and teacher, A.B. Alcott. That's Louisa May Alcott's father, Amos Bronson Alcott. The date is November 5th, 1830. And he had just founded a school in Boston with some success after some schools in Connecticut. But he got invited to Pennsylvania to start a school. So he closed a school in Boston on November 5th, and he gave this to a 6-year-old student. And it surfaced on eBay. But note what Bronson Alcott is calling his student, from his friend and teacher. Louisa May Alcott and her 3 sisters were pretty much home educated, and they were fortunate enough to be in Concord, Massachusetts, and spend a lot of time with Henry Thoreau, who was a good friend of the father, Amos Bronson Alcott. And in Louisa's book, Little Men, she pays homage to Thoreau. She calls him Mr. Hyde. He's a naturalist, and of course, the transcendentalists love the play on word there with Hyde and Hyde. But there was a bad boy in Little Men. It was a progressive school called Plumfield, and the bad boy was Dan. He was an adolescent who just wouldn't do anything right, except when he spent time with Mr. Hyde out in nature. And over again, he kept having these wonderful experiences. This is an inscribed copy of the book Little Men given to Henry Thoreau's mother, Mrs. Thoreau, with the affectionate regards of LMA, Louisa May Alcott. This is a quote from Thoreau's journal. What does education often do? It makes a straight-cut ditch of a free meandering brook. Another quote, when he was in his 20s, at age 20, he took a little time off from Harvard, and then he went to teach, and this is what he wrote to a friend. We should seek to be fellow students with the pupil and should learn of as well as with him. Somebody quipped later in life, or somebody said to Thoreau, so I understand you went to Harvard and you studied all the branches of knowledge. And he said, yes, all the branches, but none of the roots. How good a teacher was he? Well, he was very good. He and his brother John, his older brother John, opened a school in Concord. Sadly, John got lockjaw from stroking a razor and was forced to quit, and then Henry quit as well. Here's a letter from Ralph Waldo Emerson looking for a new teacher for that school in Concord, dated 1841. Mr. Thoreau, who left us now 3 weeks ago, had 40 scholars and might have reopened the school with 45. Students absolutely loved him. John Dewey was a fan of Emerson and Thoreau, and I just picked out a couple quotes from Dewey. I was a little reluctant to use this one. The length of discourse indicates the distance of thought betwixt the speaker, that's me, and the hearer, that's all of you. So this is short, so I guess it's okay to use. But this is very, very Emersonian. If I speak, I define and confine, and I am less. So who am I? This is my dad on the faculty of a very traditional New England boarding school, New Hampton School. That's 1938-39 school year. There he is. That's my uncle who was there as a PG. My dad was the tennis coach there. We went to California and taught for a while. There's that uncle, quite handsome as a young man. He's in his Woody and I'm in my Woody. We're outside of LA. My parents were teaching at the Chadwick School at that time. But we went back to New Hampton. There I am, my two brothers, my dog, and buddies. So I essentially grew up on this campus. I lived in a dormitory in the cellar, Draper cellar. This is my dictionary from grade school. I was a collector, as Jerry said, from an early age. I started this in the 5th grade, and later I still have it. In the 8th grade, I wrote, if you're wondering why I wrote all this stuff, it's so that later when I'm old, I can look at it and laugh. And I do. So it was the centennial of the Civil War, and I started washing pots and pans to buy relics, etc. I did the typical thing in a boarding school of that era. I was a student. I played in soccer, tennis, etc. But a memory that stands out, in my geometry class in sophomore year, it came time for the final exam at the end of the year. You all remember, or some of you do, the dreaded blue book. Well, the class came in, we sat down for the 2-hour exam. The instructor handed out blue books to all of us and then handed out a 1 mimeograph sheet that had 7 geometry problems on it. And then he said, listen, you guys, I know your work. I've taught you all year. I already know your final grade. These are really challenging geometry problems, and all I want to do is see what you can do with these problems. This is an optional test. If you want to get up and leave now, you can. So I just love to see what you all could do. So, here I am, a 14-year-old, really feeling quite trusted. And here's an adult who wanted to know what I thought. So that was cool. I went off to Yale. It was the 60s, and a lot was happening. And I started exploring. I got thoughtful. I was fortunate enough to take a seminar in modern Hinduism my sophomore year. And we studied these 4 people who were giants of 19th century and 20th century Indian thought. And I was particularly struck by these photographs of Sri Ramakrishna taken in the 1880s. I thought people like Jesus, the Buddha, they were like in the ancient past, but nothing like that could exist today. But I realized these were pictures taken when my grandfather was a young man. So if a saint were alive in the 1880s, what about today? So I joined a rock and roll band. That's actually my 2 brothers and me. I dropped out. Hard to see, but I'm falling into the Grand Canyon there. Also hard to see, but this is before the Summer of Love. This is the spring before the Summer of Love in Haight-Ashbury. And in Colorado, I was fortunate enough to find my life companion, Karen, and we were seekers on a spiritual quest. We were really looking to go beyond the boundaries of the culture that we'd inherited. We wanted to create a better world and explore new ways of thinking. So we discovered a path in India with a spiritual teacher, Kirpal Singh. His teacher was Sawan Singh, and his best student, you could say, was Sant Singh. This is in Bogota, Colombia in 1980. 1977. That's my 7-year-old son sitting in Sant Singh's lap. And the teachings were pretty basic. It's that there is a divine intelligence, there is a divinity, a spark within each one of us. And you all, each one of us has the right to have a direct connection with it. We don't need to have someone else telling that it's there. You need to know how to find it. And you need to live, you don't need to stop being a Christian or a Jew or a Muslim, but you need to live a kind of an honest life and learn how to sit for meditation. So we went to India. I've been to India many times. The people in this ashram, which had no running water, no electricity, were among the most cultured and humble people that I have ever met in my life. That is Sant Jabe Singh. And that's worth seeing again, sorry. He's taking those camels to market. It doesn't really belong here, but it's one of the Lego blocks I left in just because it's a great photo. This is Kirpal Singh at a school he founded in India, and that's my son at age 4. That's the principal of the school. I spent a lot of time with her. And he gave a talk there, and I have just a couple things from that talk. It's the proper atmosphere which can deliver the goods. That's why emphasis in the school should be on atmosphere. A child is the center of creative life and needs to be open as a flower is opened, gently, by sympathy, not by force. Do not let the child be imprisoned in the examination machine. Never let him or her be snubbed or scolded. So we had this document and we processed it and we came up with some core operating principles. The first one is to understand and appreciate that every person comes into this world and they're unique, and that means they have something to offer, and that means we have something to learn from them. And as Master Kirpal Singh said, that's the mystery of humility. Master Kirpal Singh was really strong on service to others being the end of knowledge. There's little point in learning unless you can use it to help others. And then finally, demonstrate kindness to all living things. From day one, Sant Bani School didn't require families to become vegetarian, but we required all families to send their kids with a vegetarian lunch. And every time we went off on a school activity, you could only, eat a vegetarian food. So in 1973, in September, we started the school. Those are the 6 brave souls who and interestingly enough, this is Beverly Swan Stikos, and I don't know if some of you know the Blue Sky School in West Nyack, but it's a member of AERO, and she was a parent there and then was their admissions director for many years. She was in our first class, and she's now relocated to New Hampshire because her parents are aging. She wants to be with them, and Sant Bani School just hired her to be their director of development, which is kind of going around, coming around. That is me. If you go back, I'm 26 years old there, and here's my last year at Sant Bani School. I'm 70, so that sounds longer than 44 years. But it's fun. That's my grandson in kindergarten, right beside me there. If there's time, I'll show you a 1-minute clip of the school at the end, but I have to go out of this program back in. Okay, this is the only audience interactive thing I've planned for the moment. There's a quiz, and if you can figure out who said these things, you will win the prize. And the prize is a book of the history, the foundation of Sant Bani School, the formative years, and it's also available on the AERO book table, but you'll get the prize if you can get it. So who said this? Let me get it all up there. Okay. An endless life of helpful change with the instinct, the longing to rise, to learn, to love, to get near the source of all good. To go from the...
I'll just, out of the blue, I'll just say Walt Whitman.
Walt Whitman, that's a good guess, because Walt Whitman certainly was very conversant with Buddhism. Yes? Another good guess. Emerson? Who? Oh, not Krishnamurti, because it's Boston, 1884. Yes? Close. That's Louisa May Alcott writing to 4 sisters in the Midwest who were asking her all sorts of questions. So this is what she wrote to them. In fact, when Little Women first came out, Christian groups were very concerned about it because the Little Women, the 4 sisters, never went to church.
It was my favorite book.
So I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this except to give you kind of some exceptional things about their lives. Emerson, when he was a teenager, and this is straight out of his journal, I was daily intoxicated, and yet no man could call me intemperate. He had these periods. He was an indescribable, infinite, all-absorbing, divine, heavenly pleasure, a sense of elevation and expansion that he had nothing to do with. They came over him. He was transported. And he would ask people, what is going on? And nobody could tell him anything until finally someone put in his hands a copy of the Bhagavad Gita. And then he found that through meditation, you could actually train your mind, and you could train your mind to go within and have access to worlds that he had just been given, basically. And this showed up in his writing. This is his first book. He wrote 2 books, really, A Week in Concord and Merrimack and Walden. But here he is quoting Sufi, Muslim Sufi saints. Hafiz and Sadi, Life of Sadi by Daulat Shah. And his aunt thought this was blasphemous. At one point he says, I like Jesus, but I love my Buddha. Why can't you like both of them? Emerson's Nature in 1836 was a total call to arms, and this, again, connects with Dewey, and I'm sure all of you will be able to relate to this. Emerson was saying to America, let's not rely on the Europeans. We need our own relation to the universe. Don't have a poetry that's from others. We should grow up. Why should we grow up among the dry bones of the past? The sun shines today also. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. What? Oh, sorry. Again about Emerson, but coming from the 3 Peabody sisters, they were kind of amazing sisters who grew up in Salem, Massachusetts. Elizabeth Peabody never married, but she was instrumental in founding the kindergarten movement in this country. Her middle sister, Mary, married Horace Mann, and they went out. He was the first president of Oberlin College. And of course, Horace Mann is a name known in education because he worked a lot toward a kind of public good through education. And the youngest sister, Sophia, married Nathaniel Hawthorne. So before she was married, she would go out into the graveyard right next to their house in Salem, and she was reading Emerson, and this is what she wrote to her brother who was in New Orleans. She's saying that she's getting a better idea of who Emerson is. He's the watchman who comes and tells us all to wake up. We say, oh, please, a little more folding of the hands to sleep, and he pleads, no, no, the morneth coming. It's time to wake up. What Emerson saw from the heights of that tower she puts him in was that every individual has a divine spark within, and that it's every person's birthright to connect with the internal divine without the need for a broker. As he said in his journal, in all my lectures I have taught one doctrine, namely the infinitude of the private man. So I'm not asking you all to believe in a divine intelligence, in a soul, but there's a sacredness. From a secular point of view, there's a sacredness to us as individuals, which these guys really got, and which you all get, because that's what we're trying to, as Jerry says, learner-centered. You know, you're respecting and honoring each child as a unique being. And Sophia's letter continues. She's talking about her older sister, Elizabeth, who's spending time with Emerson, and she writes to her brother how great it is. She has found out what she herself has herself, rather than receive anything new, I suspect. She was recognizing that Elizabeth already had that within her. It was just a question of having it awakened. Her faith in herself is freshened. She says she's going to lead an Emersonian life this winter. So this is an unpublished letter that's sitting at home. How am I doing on time? I'm getting toward the end.
Couple minutes.
I won't go into this. I've actually posted an article. No, I will post another article. But I posted an article called Brooks and Ditches which has a lot of this information. But this is a poem that Emerson published in 1856 in Boston, and people had no idea what to make of it. He'd been reading the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, and he was inspired. So he wrote this poem. Just look at the end. The strong gods pine for my abode, and pine invade the sacred seven. But thou, meek lover of the good, find me and turn thy back on heaven. Well, that went over really well with the Christian ministers. But let's not forget, Emerson was a human being. This is a gift he gave to his nephew on January 1st, 1861. His nephew was J. Haven Emerson. Can anybody read that? Yeah. So Emerson was also, Ralph Waldo Emerson was also Uncle Waldo. So I want to close by just going back to Alcott a little more and share some about his temple school. Much has been written about this. The Conversations with Children, called Conversation in the Gospels, you can find modern editions of it. It was controversial. Parents didn't like it because he talked about things like sex education with the kids. He asked their opinion on things. If they were studying geography, he took them out. He had the map, the route from their home to the school. They would practice their letters, and he would have them shape the letters with their bodies. And it was, it was pretty amazing school. And I discovered this article in a children's magazine from 1839. And this is, the editor went and visited. This large room does not look like most of the schoolrooms you have seen. It's not like a prison. The floor is nicely carpeted. There are desks, but the pupils often sit in chairs or in a sofa which stands there. This probably would be Alcott. This is a circle of kids responding to questions and asking their own questions. Kids helped each other work. Alcott grew up in poverty pretty much, and he and his cousin William Alcott decided to self-educate each other, and they got hold of highfalutin literature, and they would write letters to each other practicing this when they were kids in Connecticut. Eventually, as a young man, Bronson Alcott went down to the South as a peddler, and he saw these libraries, and he asked if he could read the books. And that's kind of how he got his start. But schools in those days did not have benches with backs. These are visitors. Probably one of them is either Sophia Hawthorne, who helped, or Margaret Fuller, who helped, or Elizabeth Peabody, who helped. There are some little boys and girls, again from the article, some little boys and girls scarcely 6 years old who know how to think and reason about things as well as most men and women. Most of them are happy. They don't feel as if they were in prison. They're not sitting around waiting to hear school is dismissed. They love the schoolroom as well as they do their own homes. That caused problems with parents, as you can imagine. And here, right in that magazine, 180 years ago, if you ever come to Boston, I hope you will call and visit it for yourself. It's open. Visitors, welcome to come. And then one of the young men who'd been there when he grew up 30 years later said that the temple school was the best thing attempted in modern times for a properly human culture, which I think is what we're all after. My hope for this, starting a school that was vegetarian, that was following a spiritual teacher from India who wore a turban in central New Hampshire in the 1970s wasn't always easy. And when I discovered this, it was very heartening. There was a sense of, we're on the right track, that's for sure. So I just, go back to that. Here is Bronson Alcott giving this book to a 6-year-old and saying, friend and teacher. If you haven't seen this, it's worth seeing. So that's a Sant Bani school today from a drone shot. Here's the book. I'm around. As I said, I posted one of these articles, so feel free to ask me any questions. It was wonderful ride. Thank you.
How are you feeling?